the RA training that I did early in the year. I know it was mandatory, probably everyone was there. So we touched on bystander intervention a little bit in that, at that event, but we're going to go a little bit deeper, and we're going to actually have you all have a chance to share some opportunities to intervene that you may have had, or if you don't have those, we can talk about some hypotheticals and what we might do in that situation. We're beginning a new bystander program that will be rolling out over the next couple months. It's Bruins Stand for Bruins. I'm putting together a Title IX student advisory board right now, so if anyone's interested, see me afterwards. But we're going to be working on social media campaigns, a social norm campaign, for just everything surrounding Title IX, such as consent and bystander intervention. So Bruins Stand for Bruins, that'll be the beginning of our active bystander campaign. All right, so as I said, I'm Laurie Shadillin. I'm a Belmont graduate and also a graduate of Vanderbilt Law School. Was in private practice for 20 years and have been here doing this at Belmont for 7 months. I just really felt like God called me to this job. It's a different kind of job every day. See a lot of students that you possibly have recommended to me, just to provide many different resources, whether a sexual assault occurred while they were a student here, or maybe it's something they experienced even as a child. You know, working with counseling, sexual assault center, university ministries, and especially working with professors for academic support for students who've experienced trauma. So that is a big part of my job. And then I also have the unfortunate role of being the judge. If we have two students who are both, two parties who are both Belmont students, and if the complainant decides to pursue a formal Title IX investigation, then I sort of oversee that investigation with other investigators performing the investigative work, and then I have the role of making the decision, deciding whether our policy was violated, and then deciding if any sanctions are appropriate. So that's pretty much half my job, and the other half of my job is prevention programming, where we do talk about what is consent, you know, what is the role of alcohol. Like I mentioned earlier, more than half of campus sexual assaults involve alcohol, and then how can we be an active bystander? What is sexual harassment? I'll be putting on at least one convocation is planned with bridge builders to talk about sort of sexual harassment in the LGBT or against the LGBTQ community. So many different opportunities for training. So I'm happy to be here today. And more than likely, a few of you will have the opportunity to put this into action. And so hopefully, you know, this is part of the plan for your future, that you're hearing this today, and maybe something will stick with you and you'll feel more confident and enabled to put this into action if necessary. All right, so I have this quote here from a Holocaust survivor. Elie Wiesel said, "I swore to never be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." So basically, you know, what this quote is saying is that if you're just silent and you stand there and you do nothing to intervene, then you're actually on the side of the perpetrator. And I know none of us want to be on that side. And usually we're not even making a conscious decision to be on that side. It's just sort of a default. That's the natural human tendency, is to be a non-active bystander. And so we'll talk about the research on that in just a moment. All right, so in general, all of these different things constitute sexual misconduct under Belmont's policy. Belmont's policy is completely different than criminal law, and a lot of times students have a hard time understanding the difference. You know, criminal law is like clear and convincing. You had to almost have everything proven in order to convict them. We use something called the preponderance of the evidence standard. And what that means is that if you have a he said, she said situation, I can't find someone responsible for violating the policy. The only way I can find them responsible is if some piece of evidence tips the scales in favor of responsibility. So that might be something like a text message the next day saying, I was way out of control, I'm sorry. It could be like an admission. Like I've had a couple of cases where the party admitted to something, not really realizing that they were admitting to a violation. They may have had a narrow view of the sexual misconduct policy, thinking, oh, it's only intercourse. So I'm going to say all I did was this. And actually, that could be non-consensual sexual contact. So just briefly as background, you know, the kinds of things you would want to look out for, non-consensual sexual contact and intercourse. And Consent is another huge issue, but it has to be knowing and voluntary. You can't be intoxicated, you can't be otherwise incapacitated, and you have to be consenting to that specific thing. So that's consent, and so you can have contact or intercourse without consent. That would violate our policy. Then you can have sexual exploitation. We probably talked about photographs and how that can turn into sexual exploitation. Did I tell you guys the story about the young man who gave the nude photograph and then, you know, they use it to extort him? This just happened a few days ago on Belmont's campus through Facebook. It was almost like exactly what we talked about in training. That same story actually happened to a student here. They didn't give any money. But it just goes to show you that what we hear about in the media and what we read about in case law happens on our campus as well. Basically, sexual exploitation is just taking advantage of someone for your own sexual benefit. So maybe they consented to having sex, but they did not consent to having it videotaped. That would be sexual exploitation. Maybe they gave you a nude photograph, but they did not consent to have you spread it around to other people. Those would all be examples of sexual exploitation. Then we have sexual harassment. This would just be unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, that it becomes so repetitive that it interferes with someone's ability to enjoy all the benefits of being a Belmont student. It could be a professor standing up and saying women don't belong in the workplace, you should be taking a cooking class instead. You know, if those kind of comments go on enough, then it could start to interfere with that individual's ability to go, you know, get the benefits of that class, and that could rise to the level eventually of sexual harassment. It could be constantly asking someone personal questions about their sex life. You know, maybe they have a different sexual orientation than you do, and you're just constantly implying it with detailed questions. Or I've had a case where a student was constantly giving every elaborate detail of his sex life to members on his team, and those team members did not want to hear that. I mean, it went way overboard. So, you know, that ended up as a sexual harassment claim. So those are just examples. And then dating and domestic violence and stalking. I've actually seen several of both of those kinds of cases. It was interesting in the freshman seminar Thrive that we do every year. We did some interactive texting questions, and we asked the question, how many people does it take to break up a relationship? 1 or 2? And a lot of people actually answered 2. A lot of freshmen actually answered as if you had to agree to break up. You know, you're at this level of being RA, so hopefully you all know that, you know, if one person breaks up, the relationship's over. You know, you don't have an option to just continue texting and calling and stalking and waiting outside their classes. So these are the kinds of stalking cases that I've seen, as well as just, I may have mentioned a case where in the middle of final exams, an ex-girlfriend texted her ex-boyfriend over 600 times in one night in the middle of final exams and threatened to kill his dog. So that was sort of a combination of dating and domestic violence and stalking. So, you know, as RAs, you're going to have opportunities to be involved in helping students who are dealing with these kinds of things. You know, someone might say to you, well, I didn't really want to do that. They put pressure on me. That would be your red flag to contact Title IX. And I'm really grateful for the RAs because I probably get 1 report a week from an RA telling me about some sort of situation. I just got a new one yesterday. So you guys are doing a great job of contacting Title IX when you hear something. You don't have to be the judge and decide whether or not it meets every characteristic in the handbook. All you have to do is say, you know what, this sounds like a red flag, I'm gonna let her know. And then we'll take it from there. So that's background for what kinds of things you're looking for. For example, you know, if you have a student who their boyfriend or girlfriend seems overly possessive, they're constantly asking, where are you? They're sending them all these text messages. Maybe they end up with these weird bruises that they have odd explanations for. You know, that could be an example of dating and domestic violence. And that's where you'd have an opportunity as a bystander to step in and do something about it. So, I know we talked about this before, but I think it's worth repeating that, you know, sexual assault is very widespread on the college campus, with 1 in 5 women reporting sexual assault and 1 in 16 men. And then the LGBTQ community is closer to 1 in 5 regardless of gender. So it's a real problem we're facing. Every gender, every sexual orientation, I end up meeting with students of all walks in my office. All right, so at Belmont, this is just as background for why we need to be an active bystander. Even 1 is unacceptable. Now, we don't have control over it all, and I will tell you that the majority of the sexual assaults that make their way to my office occur off campus, and they don't involve another Belmont student. Now, I do have a handful of cases each year that involve 2 Belmont students. And, you know, we just have to go through and try and figure out, like, was there really consent? And it's a tough job. You know, I agonize over every piece of paper. I pray over it 10 times. I look over it all again, over and over again, because it's really a hard decision, because on one hand, you have a potential victim whose life has been changed forever, and on the other hand, you have someone who may have been falsely accused who could lose their whole education. So, you know, it's a very difficult decision, but just rest assured that regardless of which side a student is on, you know, I say that I have 2 sons and I have 2 daughters, and I want everyone to be treated fairly in the process. So I really, really carefully weigh the evidence, and I go strictly by the evidence. I don't go by gut or which party I would like better or something like that. It's strictly based on the evidence. So with the idea that one sexual misconduct is unacceptable at Belmont, let's talk about what you could do to intervene, and that's bystander intervention. So, while hopefully none of you in here today would be a sexual offender, there's a high likelihood that you could be bystanders to a sexual misconduct violation. So, you know, it doesn't make sense to spend our time talking to someone, a would-be rapist, and saying rape and sexual assault are wrong, don't do it, because, you know, if they're of the bent to do something like that, then they're not going to listen to me. So obviously we have learned that our greatest success comes from talking to you, who are potential bystanders, about common scenarios and how you might be able to intervene. So who's a bystander? Well, a bystander is someone who observes violence, or sexual violence, or they observe the potential for sexual violence. And let me just say that today I was meeting with someone on substance abuse and suicide prevention. And, you know, these same bystander rules that we're talking about apply to you in those scenarios as well. Okay, you may, it may have nothing to do with sex, but, you know, you could have a student who has suicidal tendencies, who has expressed suicidal ideations. Or you may have someone who is teetering on the edge with substance abuse. Those are opportunities to be bystanders, just like active bystanders, just like the sexual assault scenario. So I want to encourage you to think broadly on this, of just any sort of risky or dangerous behavior, potentially harmful behavior that you witness, that you would think about what it would mean to be an active bystander, which could completely change someone's life. So the bystander is not directly involved, and they have a choice to make whether they're going to do something or they're going to sort of walk away and possibly live with a lot of guilt. And I have had multiple students in my office that say, I knew something wasn't right, I wish I had done something, and it's not a fun place to be in for sure. So there are lots of different ways that you can intervene, and we'll talk more about that in detail, but you could interrupt, you could cause a distraction. There are lots of different ways. You can be very direct, which some people are more comfortable with that approach than others. So the bystander effect was coined after the 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese. She was murdered on a bridge in New York while 30-something people stood by and watched and did nothing at all to stop it. There are a lot. I wish we had a little more time, because I wanted to show you guys some great videos, but you know, each one's like 10 minutes long, so that would eat up all of our time. But if you go on YouTube and you put in bystander Kitty Genovese, there have been lots of different, you know, investigative reports about who the witnesses were, what they were doing, why they didn't intervene. And so it's just very interesting, and it's really a dark side of our human nature, that we are more comfortable doing nothing sometimes than stepping in. So when you decide to be an active bystander, you're actually going against what human nature is telling you to do. And we'll talk more about the science of that. But when this murder happened, it caused people in the city to say, how could this happen? Like, how could our citizens not step in and do something about this? So basically when they did a lot of research on what happened and why people didn't step in, they coined what we call today the bystander effect. And this is when someone witnesses an emergency or a situation, and by their presence, they have an opportunity to provide assistance, but they either do nothing or they contribute, such as the bullying scenario in schools, when, you know, some people go further than doing nothing, they feel pressured to start in on the bullying that the other students are doing. So it could be doing nothing, or it could be actually taking part. And that's something we see a lot in hazing. A lot of people don't realize that there is a lot of sexual assault that goes on in fraternities and also in athletic teams. So, you know, it comes out a lot in some of the cases we see against universities, and whether they knew this was going on. You've probably read about some of these in the media recently, but you know, sexual assault is a part of hazing that a lot of men don't think about as sexual assault. They think about it more as, well, this is just part of the environment. This is just what we do. It's just part of it. But it's actually sexual assault, and it's a crime. So, you know, keep your eyes open for situations like that. So why don't people intervene? Well, it could be because they don't know how. Maybe they feel like someone is better qualified to step in, like, well, I don't know that much about this medical situation, so I'm sure a nurse will drive by, or a doctor, or someone else who knows more about this will be able to step in. Maybe they're afraid that they're confused about the situation, and they don't want to overreact. So they're worried that, you know, maybe I'm misreading the situation, and there's not really an intervention necessary, they might think. So there are so many different reasons, obviously, why you wouldn't want to intervene. In the campus lifestyle, it's often, I don't want someone to be mad at me, or I don't want to embarrass myself as sort of a straight-laced fuddy-duddy or whatever it is, you know, like I'm the police. And so people are intimidated to step in and intervene because they don't want someone to be mad at them, or because they think it's going to be embarrassing for them. So why should we intervene? Well, the bystander approach, according to this 2004 study, offers opportunities to build communities and a society that does not allow sexual violence. So it's sort of like changing the social norm, and that's why we're going to be working on a social norm campaign for issues surrounding Title IX. It's basically what is cool and what is not, what is acceptable and what is not, and that varies per campus. You know, I can tell you back in the early 90s when I was a Belmont student, what was cool then would not be cool now. You know, everything changes with time and with your location and, you know, with your environment. You know, a faith-based institution, not a faith-based institution, might play a very small role, but honestly, in what I see compared to my peers at Vanderbilt, it's pretty much all the same as far as what Title IX is viewing from the students' perspective. So it gives everyone in the community a specific role in preventing the problem of sexual violence. So by basically, if you look at a group of males, and there, you could have several different sort of community or social norms. One might be, oh, let's get her drunk, give her a few more, and then, you know, I'll help you get her a little bit more drunk, and then you can take off with her. You know, it might be okay in certain circles. And, you know, I don't want to stereotype, but in Greek life, this happens a lot. And I would say that I don't have a specific percentage, but case after case after case, student after student after student who comes to my office, you know, they were at like a fraternity party at Vanderbilt or at TSU, okay? So just from what I'm seeing, I can talk, you know, reality here is that's a common problem in the Greek culture, especially in the fraternity parties around Nashville. So you could have an environment or a social norm where that was okay, or you could have a social norm where those guys stood up to one another and said, that's not okay, that's not cool, you need to move away from her, don't take her, she's had too much to drink. So basically we have to establish this environment where it's not okay to do things like that, to take advantage of someone, to engage in sexual activity without consent, sexual violence. So there was another recent incident as recently as 2016, and this actually goes on all the time. If you go on YouTube and you put in bystander intervention, there are so many stories about, you know, lost opportunities, and there are also so many case studies. Did I talk to you guys about the ladder example? I don't think I got to go too much into bystander intervention when I met with you guys last, but I first saw this so many years ago. I think it was an episode of like Dateline NBC, where they were doing a bystander intervention experiment. And so basically they had a classroom a little bit smaller than this where the people had to go watch these boring like defensive driver videos. And so what happened was, as the students would walk into the defensive driving class, there would be a gentleman on the ladder right outside the door. And he would make a big point of making eye contact with each person who came in, say hello to them, get them to talk to him, to make sure they noticed him. Well, as soon as the students would sit down to watch the videos, there would be a super loud crash. The guy would start moaning, like, my leg, my arm, whatever it was, you know, signaling that he's hurt. And so they had a hidden camera in the room. And I know all of us like to say, oh, well, I wouldn't do that. Well, I would jump up. But, you know, these are regular people from all walks of life, and they prove the bystander effect to be true in the way they responded. So if there was a single person in the room watching the video, they would kind of look around, they would jump up, and they would run to the guy's rescue every single time. But if there were 2 people, 30 people, but what I can't believe is even 2 people, even one more person, they would kind of look at each other, they would see how the other person was going to respond, and they inevitably did nothing. So, you know, they're showing it to be true that we look at one another for our social cues. I don't want to overreact. Let me see if they look concerned. Well, they don't look too concerned, so I don't want to make a fool of myself. Well, no one else seems to think it's a big deal. So over and over again in this experiment, and there are so many out there. Have you ever seen that show, What Would You Do? Mm-hmm. Okay, they do quite a few of these. You know, basically, I would say 90% of their skits or experiments that they do are sort of the bystander effect. They're looking to see, you know, they're chewing someone out because of their race or their weight or whatever it might be. They're looking to see, are you going to step in and do something, or are you going to allow this to continue? And it's really a shame to see how many times people do nothing. One of the ones on What Would You Do is a person like laying in front of the steps in front of a big community building, just moaning and groaning, saying, somebody help me. They lay there for 20 minutes while dozens of people go by and nothing happens. And that's what happened here in 2016. This gentleman, Marquise Gaines, was attacked outside the 7-Eleven. And after he was attacked, they shoved him out to the crosswalk. And he remained there for more than 2 minutes, which is a long time when you're laying in a crosswalk, while dozens and dozens of people walk by and nobody does anything. Until finally a taxi cab turns the corner and runs over him and kills him. So, unfortunately, there's lots of video of this event out there because of all these surveillance cameras that were around for all these different businesses. But if someone had just stepped in and like even gotten him out of the road, you know, he would have been beat up, but he would have lived. So, you know, this is every gender, every race, every age, they all walk by and do nothing. So it can happen, you know, any of us could naturally behave this way. All right, so benefits of the bystander approach. Well, the first thing it does is it discourages victim blaming, okay? We should not put all the blame on the victim for sort of getting themselves in that situation. We should all be basically our brother's keeper, to use an old saying. We should all look out for one another. It offers a chance to change social norms, you know. We can decide what do we want the social norm to be on Belmont's campus. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same as MTSU or Vanderbilt or other organizations. We can get involved and we can get active and we can change what the social norm is. And also it shifts responsibility to men and women. Okay, so men and women alike have a duty and a responsibility to step in as an active bystander. So there's the It's On Us campaign, which is a national campaign, which is sort of an expert resource on the bystander effect and active bystander intervention. So basically this pledge is to recognize that non-consensual sex is sexual assault. You know how I talked about sometimes people will just admit they broke the policy and that's how we end up being able to find responsibility. So I can't tell you how many cases the party says, oh, well, she said yes a million times. Yes, it was her idea. Or, oh yeah, it was his idea. Well, had you all been drinking? Oh yes, I had to kind of hold her up. She was like plaster, you know. Not realizing that you cannot give consent to any kind of sexual activity when you've been drinking. So I don't care how many times the person says yes, if they've been drinking, that's sexual assault. The thing that, this is kind of an aside, but the thing that gets really tricky, and I've heard of one case where they haven't officially brought the case yet here at Belmont, but there are cases like going to the Supreme Court level across the nation where they're both completely drunk. And basically they're both sexually assaulting each other, right? Because if they're engaging in sex, then the other person can't give consent on either side. And what seems unfortunate is that some schools, the first one to go to Title IX, you know, gets to be the complainant and the other person gets to be the respondent when really they're both sexually assaulting each other. So obviously our view here is alcohol and consent do not mix. You know, under the criminal law, you have to be incapacitated. You have to be so drunk that you're incapacitated and you can't give consent. So you get into all this evidence about, well, what was your weight? Well, how much did you normally drink? Well, what did you drink that night? Trying to determine if you're actually incapacitated or not. Here at Belmont, we're not going to get in, we don't have like forensic analysts or anything like that. We're not going to get into the business of how drunk were you? I mean, how many drinks did you have? What is your weight? How many hours ago? How full was your stomach? To keep it simple, because I believe that the best way for students in general want to follow the rules, but they need to understand the rules. We don't need to have confusing rules. So to keep it simple and something that students can navigate themselves, we just say that alcohol and consent don't mix. So, you know, if you have alcohol involved, there's a huge chance that that's going to be considered sexual assault on Belmont's campus. So to realize that non-consensual sex is sexual assault. You know, a lot of people, when they think of sexual assault, they think of someone jumping out of the bushes and raping someone. That's not the kind of sexual assault we usually see on campuses. 80-something% of the campus sexual assaults across the country, the complainant knew their attacker. They were either maybe even in a long-term dating relationship, or they'd at least been in a class together. You know, they were intentionally together, usually. Or, you know, they met up at a party and they knew each other before. So we don't usually see these cases, fortunately, where someone just jumps out of a bush. But if it's without consent, it is sexual assault, it is rape. So you want to identify situations in which sexual assault may occur, then intervene in situations where consent has not been given or cannot be given because they're incapacitated. And then create an environment in which sexual assault is unacceptable and survivors are supported. So, you know, if any of you have ever been in my office or you've seen students there, there's absolutely no blame on a victim of sexual assault. I can't tell you how many times half my conversation when I meet with a student is, there should be no guilt or shame because this is not your fault. I mean, I feel like that's like partially my purpose for even being here is to tell students the truth about this, because the natural inclination is to blame yourself for sexual assault when no one ever deserves to be sexually assaulted, and it's never a student's fault. I don't care if they went down that dark alley, or they went in that bedroom, or they drank that alcohol, you know. Whatever it is, it did not justify a rape. So, you know, as RAs, you're going to meet with students who blame themselves for these scenarios. So I think our strong message is it's never the victim's fault. And so the It's On Us pledge helps us to build a community where victims are supported and they're not blamed. And we don't do the blame game on what were you wearing, how were you dancing. One of the cases I had last year was the respondent said, well, she was grinding on the dance floor, so I knew she wanted it. You know, so there are lots of things about it's not what you wear, it's not what you've done with other partners, it's not how you're dancing, okay? So consent has to be definite and explicit, and it's not something you just take from past behavior. So if we can work on this kind of community and helping students understand this together, then it's going to be a much more positive community for all students. All right, so we look at changing social norms. We have this model from a 2002 study, and it looks at the interplay between the individual and their relationships, and then within their community, and then within society as a whole. And so if you look at these different spheres, we can look at how a person becomes at risk for sexual assault, or maybe for either experiencing sexual assault or for perpetrating sexual assault. So, you know, a lot of these different, you've got the individual, but you've also got, like, what is a relationship like? What is the community like? What is the community saying about sexual assault? What is the social norm there? And then what is society saying about it? You know, in certain communities, there's a stereotype that sort of sexual assault is acceptable when it's not. So it's basically looking at these different communities, at these different relationships, at these different individuals, and putting out the message that sexual assault's not okay, and therefore I'm going to do my part when I have the opportunity. All right, and so we have this, there's Men Can Stop Rape, which is another organization. So it says, I'm the kind of guy who takes a stand on my campus with my friends to prevent sexual assault. So that's one of the sort of social norm campaigns we're going to be looking at, is we want to empower men to stand up. You know, like I said, you have sort of two broad, general, possible responses. One would be sort of encouraging, taking advantage of someone who's been drinking, and one would be the opposite of that and saying, I'm not going to allow that to happen. So there are so many different communities. That's the community of men. We have so many different communities where we want to get the message out. Until we do that, you know, we're going to remain at a higher risk. All right, so when you're in a bystander situation, you have 5 decision-making steps. The first thing is noticing the event. And that just means being aware of your surroundings and of what's going on and of individual interactions going on around you. Say you're at a party and you see someone just bringing this girl or guy drink after drink after drink. Notice that, you know, be in the moment enough to notice that that's going on. And then you have to interpret the event as a problem. You have to look at it and you say, well, this doesn't seem to be going in the right direction. And at that point, that's where you decide whether you're going to assume personal responsibility for doing something to change the chain of events and to make it go in another direction. Then you have to know how to help, and then you have to implement your plan. So there are 3 sort of well-known methods for being an active bystander. Some people are really comfortable with the direct approach. Growing up, I was never comfortable with the direct approach. My family members can't believe I became an attorney because I would wait at the end of the line and get calls for a straw because I wouldn't want someone to think I was taking cuts. That's just sort of my personality. Growing up, I would have never been the direct approach kind of person, and that's okay. The important thing is that you decide to do something. But a lot of people are really, there it goes. A lot of people are really comfortable by just going up to someone and saying, she has had way too much to drink, get your hands off her, I'm taking her home. You know, that would be a very direct approach. Raise your hand if you might be really comfortable. I see some heads nodding. Yeah, that might be your typical method of communication, okay? And that is awesome. Then we have the distracting technique, and that's basically spill your drink on your friend, you know, who's had too much and get her out of the situation. Cause a scene, like do something crazy, like 80s dancing, I don't know what. Anything you can think of that is going to come in the middle. We're going to have some people volunteer to demonstrate the 80s dancing technique towards the end, okay? So be thinking about that if you're good at like the Roger Rabbit or some of those old dances, which I'm going to show you too. So the distracting technique is that's just cause some sort of commotion to break up the scenario and then move someone to safety. And then we have the delegation technique, and that is where you feel like your life may be at risk, or you could be physically in danger, or your personal property in danger. You just feel like, you know, in this scenario, your gut's telling you that's not safe. And as a mom, I say, listen to your gut, okay? You can go to the bouncer, you can go to the RD, you can go to campus security, you can go to Title IX. You know, there are sometimes it's best to delegate. And let me say that you're never judged for which approach you take. I don't care what approach. I will just be so proud and happy and thrilled if you take any approach at all. So there's no right or wrong answer unless you decide not to do anything. That would, in my opinion, be a wrong answer. So you can get help from someone who's better equipped. Sometimes it's serious enough that you should call 911. Again, no one's going to judge you for jumping the gun. You have the best of intentions and you're trying to avoid what could be a horrible, life-changing situation. Okay, so you have to decide, who are you in this scenario? Are you going to be comfortable with the fact that you saw this coming and did nothing about it? All right. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a couple of minutes to have you share if you've ever been in a situation where you've witnessed something and either you had the chance to be an active bystander or someone around you did. It could be something someone shared with you, you know, as an RA. It could be something that happened in high school, you know, whatever. If you ever experienced anything like that, we'd love to hear about it and hear what you did or maybe what you wish you had done differently. Anyone? Mm-hmm.
So on my Maymester in Rome this year, a lot of us in the evening would go out, you know, enjoy the evening culture. Rome's alcohol content just in Italy is a lot stronger than what we're used to. And they tell everyone, to the Italians, drinking is social, so don't make a mess of yourself. But not a lot of people listened, and so we had a situation where a couple of the girls on the trip, they drank a lot, and they were just attracted a lot of people to them, a lot of guys that wanted to come and chat with them. And one girl in particular, she was just 2 guys, they were all over her, like, let's get some more drinks, let's take some shots, limoncello, woo woo, and everything. And she just was so far gone, and they just kind of started walking away, and I said, hey, wait a minute. And you know, and I was like, I have no clue what I'm doing. They barely speak English. Right. All I know is I don't even know what I do, grassy or something.
Yeah, you're just in that moment, right?
So
You
yeah,
have
I
to
was
make
just
a
like,
decision.
I'm just gonna grab her and like hope my friends back me up and will help me. And so I just ran over there and I was like, no, she's not going. And then thankfully my friends that were with me, they came over. We were like telling the guys, no. And they were like, no, she's fine. I tried to take her and I said, oh, no, she's not.
You know, this is a common with the study abroad, you know, where alcohol's involved in different kind of scenarios, and everyone's interested in learning about the other culture and everything. There was another case last year where two friends were with a third friend, and the two friends were ready to go back to their hotel, and the third friend was like, no, I'm just gonna stay here, and I'm gonna hang out with these two guys I met. And she's just sort of naive and happy-go-lucky that they're gonna walk her back to her hotel and everything, and that's not what happened.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's no blame for the two friends. I mean, you know, I think we're always struggling. We have things on both sides of the scales. You know, we want to give our friends autonomy. They're adults. We don't want to treat them like children. But at the same time, you know, they may not realize they're putting themselves into a really risky situation. Another good example that I heard about was at a local restaurant, or local bar and restaurant, I believe it was on 12 South. Two grown ladies were there. They weren't students or anything, but they were there and they saw a guy and a girl apparently on a date. And when she got up to go to the bathroom, they saw him pour something in her drink. So, and let me tell you, as Title IX at Belmont, this happens all the time. In fact, I have some posters in my office where you can drop your drink on there and test to see if it's been roofied or not. So if anybody wants some of those, this could happen at Cracker Barrel. I'm not saying, you know, there's like, oh, if you talk about that, they're gonna think they should go out and get drunk. You guys are not gonna base your activity on what I tell you to do, okay? But I have to be realistic that, you know, drinking goes on, okay? And I want everyone to be safe. And so, you know, it's really CSI, but you can actually put your drink and it will turn colors if a drug's been put into the drink. But these two ladies had a decision to make. You know, are they just going to look the other way and be like, oh, it's their business? No, they decided to take action. So one went and told the manager, and one went to the bathroom and told the girl. And so obviously she did not leave with him. Who knows what could have happened if they hadn't done that? Has anyone else ever had any situations where maybe someone's trying to take advantage or?
I had a situation last year where I got to deal with all three of the delegate direct option basically, but it was a friend who was turning 21, and so we were all hanging out together, and it was not her, but another one of the friends who just had way too much to drink. And there was a guy that all of us were like a really tight group of friends. There was a guy there that like none of us really knew. And we saw him pull our like really, really drunk friend into someone's bedroom. So we kind of teamed up, and myself and like one of the bigger guys went to the bedroom and grabbed him. Someone else called an Uber. We like sent her home in an Uber with someone else that we trusted. And then told the guy that he was not welcome back ever again. So,
I mean, thank God for friends like you guys. Because so many times people don't do that. They want to mind their own business. They don't want to interfere, and it has horrible consequences that I hear about every day in my office. So thank you for doing that.
So this kind of happened while I work at a 24-hour gym on midnight shift. So like I'm just minding my own business there, and then like a bunch of like coworkers just come in from there. Like it's a Friday night, so they just all came in like, hey, we're here to take an Uber and stuff. And there's like one guy there who I'd never seen before, and like you know how everyone's just chatting up, they're obviously like tipsy or whatever. So like as soon as the guy who I don't know what the name is went to the bathroom, like two girls just like dipped and like left. And like I just looked at like the guy, and I asked him like, what was that? They're like, yeah, this dude just been following us for like since we got off the bar. So I don't know. Like they're just gonna bounce, and I'm just gonna stay here and deal with it.
Yeah.
And like he just left in his car, and the guy just came out, and I just had to look at him and be like, what's up? How's it going? How are you? And like. It was just the most awkward situation I had to ever deal with.
I mean, there's no guarantee that this is going to be super awkward, because it probably is, you know, to be an active bystander, but it definitely beats the alternative. Some of you probably seen all these stories going around on Facebook or whatever. Some of you might still use Facebook, but there have been quite a few incidents in Middle Tennessee that are verified by law enforcement of men following around women and young children, like in a Walmart or something. Have you heard about this? And so, I mean, it gets a little crazy, like where they're down every aisle, and there's usually like 2 guys. And this actually happened on 12 South to a Belmont student, where there were, they may have sent out a campus alert or something about this, but there were these 2 guys that were sort of on different sides of the street following this girl wherever she went, and then they went into the restaurant with her, and they had a really awkward conversation with her, like, isn't it good to just be alive? And they were saying all these things and asking her where she lives and what her name is. And believe it or not, it's almost identical to a scenario that happened a year earlier. So this is going on as close as 12 South. So number one, keep your eyes open, but keep your eyes open for other people as well, because in one of those Walmart scenarios, someone actually came up to the woman and said, I wanted you to know that I've noticed this guy's been following you throughout the whole store. And so she was able to go to security, and who knows what could happen.
I had a situation last year where I was on the music side of campus, lawn, sitting, practicing my guitar. Sorry, typical. And a man approached me, and I did not recognize him, and he was commenting about guitar, which is pretty typical. So I was like, oh, well, you know. So we're talking about classical guitar, and the conversation started to rapidly decline into a more sexual nature, and proceeded to sit down next to me, and I didn't know where he was from or whatever. So I saw a friend of mine in the distance, and I was like, come over here.
Yeah.
I was texting.
You don't want to be awkward, but it's better to be awkward than.
Right. And I said to him, he said, can I have your number? Like, can we go to Smoothie King kind of deal? And I said, you know, I don't give my number to strangers. I don't know who you are. Please leave. But that did happen on campus, and I reported it, and they have that. But so
this kind of stuff is happening nearby, so we just have to be alert all the time. And as a reminder, campus security does offer 24/7 security escorts. So if you ever feel like you're in danger, you're at the library, the library's open all night now, right?
Yeah.
So that can be pretty dangerous to be coming back from the library at like 2 o'clock in the morning by yourself. They don't mind doing it. In fact, they like getting out of the office. It gives them something to do, they've said. Give them a call and get a security escort. It's better safe than sorry. You know, it's okay to sort of nag at your friends if they're being unsafe. You know, like I would do my daughter or whatever. You know, like, do you want me to meet you? Do you want some of us to meet you? Because it's not safe, you know. It's better to speak up than to not. Does anyone else, 10 minutes?
I was say about 10 minutes.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other examples, or this is really helpful to learn from each other?
I have one from high school. My best friend, she has an ex-boyfriend that just wouldn't leave her alone. And so we were at somebody's house just hanging out, and he had walked from a party at somebody else's house down the street to the house that we were at, and he was really drunk, and he wanted to talk to her, and he just kept telling everybody he was there, I want to talk to her, I want to talk to her. Well, luckily nobody let him inside the house, but nobody would make him like leave, so I just walked out there, and he's like 6'4", I'm 5'4". But he was really, really wasted, so I just stuck my like finger in his chest, and I just like was like pushing him, but like being small, I just was doing what I could, I guess. But then we had a couple of bigger guys there, and I said, you need to escort him back to wherever he came from. And so they called people who were other people who were at the other party, and made sure that he just left the house. But yeah, so I guess I did, like Mary said, we took a couple of those steps. Like I got in his face as much as I could, and then had the bigger guys make sure that he got somewhere else, that my friend stayed inside.
That's perfect. You know, all this stuff with the confirmation hearings and Kavanaugh, it's got everyone talking about these scenarios, and actually they're pretty common, and we may not want to share them all, but we've all probably had experiences that are somewhere along that line. But one of my own family members, as a result of the Kavanaugh hearing, told me, and I didn't even know about this growing up, that she was at a party where they were all plastered, and she had gone upstairs to go to bed, and one of the guys from the party came up there and was beginning to assault her. And then the other guys at the party downstairs noticed he was missing and took off upstairs and busted in the room and like threw him out. So, I mean, they prevented this from happening to her. And I'm really thankful for that. I mean, it takes a lot of courage and nerve to do something like that when it's one of your guy friends or one of your girlfriends. But, I mean, it changes lives, you know. All right. Anything else? Any questions? All right, well, thank you for sending in your reports when your residents share these things. It could be, like I said, it could even be an old childhood trauma, but there's still a lot we can do to help. So thank you, and my door's always open.